Yo, I've finished up with my read-through of the Namek Saga, and I've compiled my ranking of every character that shows up in it. Just as a reminder, this is a manga-only ranking, where I'm taking guidebooks and statements as secondary sources. No anime scaling here. Something that I will be doing different this time around is breaking the characters into tiers from S to F. If the character ends up outside of F tier, I'm not going to go over them. Instead, I'll show them on the screen now. They're ordered from weakest to strongest, starting at the top left, and following a path across the screen. If you have any questions on their scaling, feel free to ask me in the comments. I'll also be including a proper tier list at the end of the video, so be sure to stick around to see what that looks like. Yeah, without further ado, let's get into the ranking, starting with rank F. At the bottom of F tier and occupying the 21st spot in our ranking, we have Appule. And despite being a random Frieza soldier, this guy's actually kinda strong, which might surprise you if you haven't read through the Namek Saga in a bit, but let me lay this out for you. This guy was part of Frieza's squad that was pillaging Dende's village at the start of the saga. If you recall, the Namekian Warriors showed up at some point and started fighting the fodder Frieza soldiers. The only one that survived and remained on his feet was Appule. A power level of 1000 is a joke to this guy, and he held his ground against the same guys that were slaughtering his comrades at a power level of at least 3000. Through his survival and ability to throw hands with the warriors, Appule stands as the only non-elite Frieza soldier that makes it onto the ranking. The Namekian Warriors sit at the 20th spot, and this ranking is supposed to just take them as their individual selves, not as a group, just assuming that they are all more or less equal. They have a recorded power level of 3000 according to Dodoria Scouter, and prove themselves to be more than a match for Frieza's rank-and-file troops. Most importantly for their ranking, Zarbon points out to Appule that the warrior Namekians are too much for him. While that could mean that Appule can't take multiple warriors at once, Appule seemed to be on, at best, even footing with the warrior that he was fighting. So if Zarbon is saying that a warrior is too much for him, then that most likely means that a Namekian warrior alone has a numerical advantage over Appule. This grants any Namekian warrior a rank above Appule for the sake of the ranking. Kai remains viable for our ranking, taking the 19th spot solely due to his given power level of 3500. Moving on. He appears for a single panel, but this is the only real opportunity I have to address Bardock's scaling within a manga-only framework. Since I am prioritizing the manga, the anime claims about him nearing Vegeta's 10,000 power level or accessing Super Saiyan are not being considered. Under normal circumstances, Bardock would rank much lower. He is explicitly identified as a low-class Saiyan, while figures like Nappa and Paragus are treated as mid-class warriors. On paper, that places Bardock well beneath even elite Saiyan tiers of power. However, the Granola arc flashback complicates that. In his fight against Gas, Bardock pushes past his limits and defeats him. Gas frames himself as a ceiling that Saiyans cannot surpass, positioning his strength as beyond what the Saiyan race should be capable of overcoming. Taking that statement at face value would imply that Gas stands above the established Saiyan hierarchy at the time. This could mean that Bardock exceeded Saiyan Saga Goku's power level of 8000, since Vegeta was not that impressed by his base level of power at the time, but does not pass Vegeta's power level of 18,000, since he also likely surpassed any living Saiyan from when Bardock and Gas fought. A more conservative reading is that Bardock in that moment exceeded the expected limits placed on Saiyans of his class and reached into mid-class territory. Mid-class Saiyans like Nappa and Paragus in his prime are portrayed and stated to be in the several thousand range, comfortably above King Kai's 3,500. Bardock defeating Gas strongly suggests he at least reached that level during the fight. This does not mean that Bardock permanently existed at this tier of power. He remained classified as low class for most of his life, and nothing really indicates that he could freely access that power at will. What the flashback does show is that in a high pressure battle, he was capable of a temporary breakthrough far beyond expectations. That single showing is enough to justify his placement here at the 18th spot and the bottom of E tier. Alright, Yamcha being 17th is going to take some justification given his complete lack of feats. If we were using anime scaling, he could be pushed higher since he, beat a member of the Ginyu Force, but sticking strictly to the manga leaves us with very little to work with. The only real reference point we have is his prior growth. During training on Kami's Lookout, Yamcha jumped from a power level of 177 to a power level of 1480, an 8.4 times increase. Now, that is a massive increase in a relatively short period, but also in that same general time frame, Goku went from 416 to roughly 8,000 under King Kai. Goku's jump was larger, which makes sense given his Saiyan biology and the intensity of 10 times gravity training with a god. And now that question becomes, what did Yamcha gain from training on King Kai's planet? There's really no way to tell, and assigning an arbitrary multiplier doesn't sit right with me. What we can say is this. It would be narratively nonsensical for Yamcha's gains under 10 times gravity and direct instruction from King Kai to be lower than what he achieved under Kami. If we assume even a baseline of similar growth, he's hitting the 12,000 range, putting him on similar footing with Krillin and Gohan to some extent when they initially got their potential unlocked by Guru. I really wanted to put Tien over the guy above him, but without any feats to his name, I couldn't in good faith put him any higher than 16th place. Tien started at a higher level of power than Yamcha, sitting at 1,830 during the Saiyan conflict, and he possesses a far greater trump card in the Tri-Beam. Tien received the same training as Yamcha, and logically he shouldn't see inferior gains from King Kai compared to his time with Kami. Even without introducing a hypothetical multiplier, his higher starting point naturally places him above Yamcha. If we were to project his growth based on the trajectory we saw on Earth, Tien's power would land somewhere in the 17,000 range. While that is almost on par with Saiyan Saga Vegeta, and his Tri-Beam likely gives him a lethal edge, this remains purely speculative. In a ranking that prioritizes manga evidence, speculation holds far less weight than the established benchmarks of characters who actually fought on Namek. Tien and Yamcha both likely reached levels far above King Kai and Nappa, to such an extent that I believe they stand above even Bardock's temporary peak, but they simply cannot be placed any higher without the feats to back it up. That said, if I were making this tier list in a more casual environment, I would put Tien and probably Yamcha a few spots higher, but for now, they remain the gatekeepers to the top 15. At 15th place, we have Kui, who is the representation of Vegeta's previous peak of power from the Saiyan Saga. With a power level of 18,000, Kui sits formerly as Vegeta's equal and was given the task of eliminating him, and he approached it with a level of confidence that might suggest he might have been the stronger of the two. Unfortunately, he was easily disposed of by Vegeta's Zenkai amped power at the beginning of the arc, but him existing as a character with blatant, tangible scaling to the previous peak of the series places him also at the peak of E tier. Dodoria sits at 14th place, kicking off D tier. He sits as the third strongest among Frieza's normal force, sitting just below Zarbon and the big man himself. With a power level of 22,000 granted by Daizenshu, Frieza believes that Dodoria could beat Vegeta's 24k power level if he works alongside Zarbon. This alone grants him vast superiority over all those before him in the ranking, as Dodoria can actually do something against early Namek Saga Vegeta. As we saw though, on his own, he got taken out pretty quickly. Despite being in the same tier, Zarbon's 13th place ranking is almost like the start of D+. His base power level is 23,000, right in between Dodoria and early Namek Vegeta, and as we saw in the manga, he was at a clear disadvantage while fighting in base. However, when transforming into his monstrous form, he held a gross advantage over Vegeta, stomping him in a similar manner to how Vegeta did Dodoria and Kui. Even in their rematch, Vegeta's monologue and dirty fighting kinda implied that Vegeta's post-Zenkai self was still wary of Zarbon's power in this form, and while he fought at a disadvantage, Zarbon still put up a decent fight before getting taken out. At the top of D tier, we have Guldo. If this was a pure power ranking, Guldo would be maybe 6-7 spots lower on the list, but it's not. His battle power is relatively low, being floored by Gohan and Krillin's levels of power, which were said to be over 10,000 and 14,000 and 13,000 respectively, according to Daizenshu. His time stop and telekinesis abilities mitigate this failing, however, as he was able to avoid their attacks multiple times and reposition, despite them knowing about his abilities. He then restrained both of them with his telekinesis, and had enough mental power to rip a tree out of the ground and throw it with enough force to potentially one-shot Krillin. If Vegeta did not intervene, this would have genuinely been a mid-diff win for Guldo. Now, if Guldo had to split his power to restrain Krillin and Gohan, then his telekinesis can affect characters with power levels as high as 27,000, and that ceiling may be even higher since he was capable of exerting enough force to kill each of them while holding them in place. Due to his hacks and overall narrative placing him above anyone else under Frieza's employ, Guldo stands at the pinnacle of D tier. Nail sits at the bottom of C tier at 11th place. With an official power level of 42,000, he is the strongest Namekian we see until the later parts of the saga, with Elder Guru hyping him up as being somewhat capable of assisting in the fight against Ginyu Force, given that Recoome was thrashing Vegeta, who was well over 20k by this point. I believe that Nail holds some relativity to the other members of the Ginyu Force. Whether or not he beats them is another story, as Guru does add the qualifier that he might only be able to help them a little bit. Either way, Nail also believes that he'd be able to do something against them, so I'm inclined to believe that he sits in a similar tier to them in power. Recoome, my least favorite member of the Ginyu Force, rounds out the top 10. I hate how he sounds in the English dub. It's constant rage bait, and his damn voice lines in Xenoverse haunt me to this day. Despite that, this guy's a monster. He stomped Vegeta, Krillin, and Gohan while messing around, and took Vegeta's strongest attacks head on. Ginyu estimates that Goku would need a power level of 60,000 to beat Recoome as badly as he did, and given how badly Vegeta was beating Qui and Dodoria with his power level of 24,000, it's possible that Recoome was hitting the 50,000. That said, Recoome fights like an idiot, constantly leaves himself open, and is slow to use full power. This is in stark contrast to his comrades who sit just above him on the list. Burter is more or less equal to Recoome in power. Nothing would suggest the contrary, and there could even be an argument that Burter holds the edge due to his speed likely being greater. On the topic of speed, Burter being the fastest in the universe is such a weird thing to claim when there are at least 2 people stronger than him, and 2 others that are on his level. We've probably all heard the Dragon Ball Abridged bit on this, so I'll stop here, but the only way I see this being true, and not just a self-proclaimed title that everyone runs with, is if his travel speed is just absurdly higher than everyone else's. Like he's the Usain Bolt or Karsten Warholm of the Ginyu Force, instead of a guy that can throw fast punches. Either way, he seems to be a more serious fighter than Recoome, so I'll grant him a higher rank. Jeice earns the 8th spot solely due to his Crusher Ball scaring a Goku that was fighting Captain Ginyu. Goku had no reason to be holding himself back significantly here, and while he did deflect a Crusher Ball from earlier, he was very clearly focusing on that attack and preparing himself to deflect it. Without that time spent preparing for the deflection, it is likely that a Crusher Ball presents enough of a danger to Goku to force him to dodge the attack, instead of no-selling it, which one might expect given his level of superiority over Jeice. In the end though, you can realistically swap Jeice, Burter, and Recoome around without too much drama. I just think that Recoome fights like an idiot, Burter's speed hype is just branding, and Jeice's attacks hit above his weight class, which is why they're ordered like this. Now at B tier, we have Captain Ginyu himself sitting at the 7th spot. Ginyu has an official power level of 120,000 and held an advantage over base Goku during their brief fight on Namek. Ginyu even got him in a full Nelson, which he couldn't break out of after Goku was momentarily stopped by Jeice's Crusher Ball. Ginyu also gives the impression of someone more skilled in combat than your average goon. He can actually regulate his power level somewhat and showed true skill and battle sense in his fight against Goku. I actually wish we could have seen more of him on Namek, as I found his character to be pretty enjoyable compared to some of the other villains and goons in DBZ. This alone places him on an entirely different level than everyone below him, to the point that he could boss raid everyone else on this ranking and come out on top. His body change ability is also really strong, giving him some potential to turn fights around against those that may be stronger than him. At 6th place and the top of B tier, we have Krillin. Now, I know we have a V-Jump power level for this guy at 75,000, but V-Jump gives weird power levels for a bunch of characters that don't quite make sense. Specifically, the power level for Final Form Cooler being 470 million, Legendary Super Saiyan Broly being 1.4 billion, and Super Gogeta being 2.5 billion. Given the rate of power escalation in Dragon Ball, I find it hard to believe that Broly is only 3 times stronger than Cooler, got manhandled by an unmastered Super Saiyan Goku. And I know you can say, oh, well, the movies are different continuities, and whatever. I don't think they're keeping that in mind here, I'll be honest with you. While these numbers sound cool, I don't think they make much sense for what is shown in Dragon Ball, and if that's not good enough for you, the article that grants Krillin that power level uses images from the anime, meaning that it might just be an anime-only power level. I say all of that because Krillin's performance against Second Form Frieza is really impressive. For just a moment, forget about the 75,000 power level. Krillin is fighting a guy with a power level over 1 million, Second Form Frieza. He is far stronger than anyone we have ever seen, and what does Krillin do? He chops the guy's tail off with a Destructo Disc, throws more at him, forcing him to dodge, and causing him to show some amount of worry and effort, as shown by the look on his face and sweat flying off of him. Successfully rage baits him and runs, and he doesn't immediately get overtaken or blitzed, and then he blinds him to give his allies a chance to attack. You would think that Krillin would have a power level in the hundreds of thousands to pull this off. He's obviously not in the same league as Frieza, he says so himself, and he's even weaker than Vegeta at this point as he defers to him for the final attack, but given Vegeta's own power being capable of challenging First Form Frieza, and at least scuffing Second Form Frieza, I think that's valid. So yeah, V-Jump does give Krillin a power level of 75,000, but I genuinely believe that this is a situation where the guidebooks are wrong and Krillin shows a much greater level of power. Have finally reached A tier, and we are starting off with Gohan. It's at the 5th spot, a slight promotion from his previous ranking. Gohan grows a lot throughout the Namek Saga, starting out a little above Krillin and growing into the mid 10,000s before jumping up to the 20,000s fight against Ginyu in Goku's body. It seems that Guru's potential unlock took a while to fully take effect though, because the stuff that Gohan pulls off in his fight against Frieza is honestly insane. After Frieza impaled Krillin, Gohan's anger spiked and he actually pressured and harmed the guy, which Frieza admitted himself. Gohan was critically injured after this, but Dende healed him, and after doing so, Gohan was right back up and ready for round 2 against Frieza. It's stated here that he got a Zenkai, with Vegeta himself even hyping his power as something that could stand a chance against Frieza. When Frieza assumed his 3rd form and started torturing Piccolo, Gohan again saw a sharp increase in power and managed to temporarily push Frieza back with a full power energy blast. While this was nothing more than an amusing display to Frieza, it serves as a strong example of Gohan's peak at this point. However, under normal circumstances, he likely sits just below Second Form Frieza and Piccolo in power. Speaking of Piccolo, at 4th place, which is where he sat in the previous ranking, we have Piccolo. His performance against Second Form Frieza pretty clearly puts him at least on, if not a little above, his level of power, with him dealing significant damage against him while weighted, and prompting him to transform on removing his weights and no longer holding back. Given Frieza's quick jump to transforming, it's likely that he at least somewhat feared Piccolo's power here and did not want to be put into a position where he had a chance of losing. While Gohan later elicited a similar reaction from Frieza's 3rd form, this was more out of Frieza's general caution of Saiyans than a need to grow stronger. Overall, Gohan's inconsistent peaks may be above Piccolo's power, but he is not consistent enough to normally rank above him. Piccolo also saw a huge increase in power later in the arc after absorbing Gohan and Krillin's energy, enough to send a 50% Frieza flying with a kick and even jarring him a bit. Though this should not be taken into account for his normal level of power, as this was just a temporary amp. In 3rd place, a slight fall from grace, we have Vegeta. His power progression throughout the arc was really cool to see, but in the end he falls short of the top 2. His last ditch Zenkai boost from Krillin did boost him to pretty respectable levels however, allowing him to track Frieza's blasts when the others couldn't, and being capable of knocking Gohan out of the way when a blast was going to hit him. Vegeta rests at a level of power that is far beyond that of everyone below him, such that he could be considered an A+ tier character, capable of wiping out Piccolo or Gohan with similar ease to Frieza's third form. The only thing stopping him from moving up a tier is the sheer gulf in power between A and S tier. Alright, these last two spots shouldn't be too much of a surprise to anyone. At the bottom of S tier, and ranked second in the Namek Saga, we have Frieza himself. He represents a pinnacle of power, not only for our heroes, but also the universe as a whole, previously thought to be unbeatable, even in his first form. In his final form, he could take on everyone below him in this list at the same time, with just a fraction of his full power. At his full power, he managed to harm and outmatch Super Saiyan Goku in some instances, though I would make the argument that Goku was more beat up as a Super Saiyan than Frieza was when he went to 100%. And for our number one spot, it's obviously Goku. I don't need to make this super long. He's the legendary Super Saiyan, presented as, bar none, the strongest in the universe at this point. I mean, he beat Frieza, he surpassed everyone's expectations for him, and he even survived the explosion of Namek. I can't think of anyone more deserving of top 1 in the Namek Saga than Goku. Right, that's my ranking. I'm going to have the tier list up now while I talk about some upcoming things. Thank you for watching the video. Let me know what you thought in the comments. If this is something you'd like to see more of, consider subscribing. If you liked the video, consider liking it. Yeah, if you're interested at all in hardcore nuzlocking of really hard Generation 1 ROM hacks, I'd recommend checking out the live stream VODs on this channel, as I've been nuzlocking Yellow Kaizo semi-frequently. It's been slow going. I had a recent PR and that was really cool. But yeah, no, I'd recommend checking out those streams if that's something you're interested in. I'm sure I'll make a video on that at some point, whether or not I beat it or fail. I think once I hit, like, I don't know, 30 attempts, I'm probably gonna make a video on the game. So yeah, stay tuned for that. Next is the Android Saga. I'm not going to be doing the Android Saga as part of the Cell Saga. I think the Android Saga is kind of interesting to look at on its own before we get into all the stuff that happens in the Cell Saga. So yeah, stay tuned for that.